It's frustrating when something is just good when it could have been great. Squandered potential always leaves me with a sense of guilty disappointment. I like it, and maybe that should be enough, but I still feel let down about what it could have been. If the world's best masseuses got together and fed their arms into a mincing machine, that doesn't mean they wouldn't taste nice in a spaghetti bolognese, but they'd have squandered their potential as master massagers. If you're the world's best contortionist and you spend all your time standing in for the letters they're missing on the sign at your local cinema, it's not that you won't improve the legibility of their movie titles, but you'd be missing out on the bigger and better things the world has to offer you. Like fitting in tiny little boxes or stepping through a tennis racket. And when the cinema sign lifestyle finally catches up to you and you develop a bad back, well, there won't be anyone left to help you. Enter What Remains of Edith Finch, a game I enjoyed playing, would recommend to anyone, and just wish was a little different. You play as a young woman, Edith, as she explores her old family home. She's the last surviving member of her family, and each of her relatives' rooms has been sealed off after their death, turning each into something of a shrine. Once you make your way into a room, you find something related to that person's death, a diary entry or a series of photos for example, and play out the scene leading up to their demise. It's a bit like 1,000 Ways to Die, if 1,000 Ways to Die was a video game, and there were only about 20 ways to die, and they didn't actually show the deaths, and the narration was sympathetic and not mocking, and the narrator was also a character with their own fleshed out story, and it didn't leave you with a mild sense of guilt for having experienced it, and if they didn't try to pass off their ridiculous scenarios as real, it's not that much like 1,000 Ways to Die. In fact, for the most part, it's a walking simulator. You can tell because when it starts and you instinctively try to run, the camera zooms in instead. Now, this is usually a bad sign. I don't want things to take longer than they need to. That's why I only watch slow-mo guys' videos at regular speed. A balloon broke. I'm out and I've saved time. That's obviously a bad example, but in games, running is ubiquitous to the point where it never seems out of place or silly to include. I would just like the option to take things a bit faster if I want. That said, a lot of the game is navigating tight spaces, and if they were going for what a person would actually do, it does make sense that she'd walk, not run. I can respect the push for realism even if I don't agree with it. So she slowly walks to the house and tries a mysterious key her mother has left her, and it doesn't work. She walks to the back door and immediately crawls through the doggy door rather than trying the key on that door, so maybe it wouldn't matter if she could run after all. You start to explore the house and you'll immediately begin to ask questions like, why is everything such a mess? What happened to kill all of these people, and who would need free copies of a book called Weird Recipes? Edith narrates as you explore, filling you in with what she knows and piecing things together alongside you. When you play as one of the other family members, someone else narrates, usually the soon-to-be deceased, but on occasion it's someone close to them instead. The first family member you play as is a great introduction to these death sections, letting you know from the off that things aren't going to stay normal. You are a little girl, Molly, who is incredibly hungry. You eat some toothpaste, think about eating a fish, and then eat some holly. Then, you leap out of your window and you're suddenly a cat chasing a bird. You jump from tree to tree before catching the bird. And then you are a bird. You soar above snowy fields and swoop down to scoop up rabbits. You catch one rabbit, and then a second, and then the best thing that could possibly happen in this or any moment happens. To explain, let's run through some scenarios. Scenario 1. You are a gardener who's been tasked with keeping a mountain range green and lush. Recently, moles have been popping up on the sides of the mountains, ruining their otherwise perfect aesthetic. To combat this, you've been hurling boulders down the mountain in hopes of hitting the moles. It worked for a while, but now they've learned the noise the boulders make and hide when they hear them coming. You need to find something softer, but equally deadly to chuck down the mountains in place of the rocks. Scenario 2. You are a marine biologist partially funded by Liam Gallagher, and you're about to give your latest presentation on predatory fish. As a result of your funding, you must play an Oasis song over the title slide of every presentation you give. This time you've been given the song Roll With It, and you just need a visual that ties that song in with your work. Now, both of those problems could be easily solved if there was a shark rolling down a hill. And that's exactly what happens. You turn into a shark, fall out of the tree, and play as a shark rolling down a hill. It's glorious. And I just plucked 2 random everyday issues out of the air there. Most problems could probably be solved this way. Unfortunately, the best section of any piece of media ever created only lasts about 10 seconds, after which you'll fall into the sea. Once you're there, you chase a seal, but you'll just be wishing you were back where sharks belong. Sloped land. After catching the seal, you're still hungry, but thankfully, you're now a monster aboard a ship. You slink forward, eating the sailors as you go, before sneaking your way up through the little girl's toilet and under her bed to soon kill and eat her, despite, seemingly, also being her. The end. Now, the berries she ate are probably relevant to how fast things got weird there, but this first vignette lets you know a few things. That there'll be varied gameplay and control schemes, that you'll be playing out these people's dying moments, and, importantly, that it's gonna get real odd. And the great part is, none of the others are anything like this. You'll find yourself flying a kite, controlling dancing bath toys, working at a factory, and playing out a slasher comic book. It's all over the place, and none of the parts really fit together, yet somehow it works, like a Frankenstein's monster made exclusively from parts found in a zoo's cemetery, or a baseball hot dog made exclusively from parts found in a zoo's cemetery. The gameplay changing with each story does a lot to keep things interesting, but every section is also simple enough gameplay wise that if you aren't looking to engage in the stories they tell, you probably aren't going to like any of them. Except maybe Hill Shark. You'll probably like Hill Shark. If you're not playing games exclusively for the gameplay though, there is a lot to like in the stories Edith Finch tells. The game is exploring loss, and not a little loss, like losing the turkey on Christmas or if Russell Brand cut off his hair, but a huge one, like a falconer losing all the falcons from the falcon van, or if we lost all traces of several species of lice, beetles and small rodents after Russell Brand cut off his hair. Death is a heavy subject, and Edith Finch does it justice, coming at it in interesting and often unexpected ways. But unfortunately, the first death section you play highlights one of my main issues. The gameplay is varied, and so are the control schemes, but a lot of them end up feeling awkward and restrictive, taking you out of what should be great immersive moments. Molly seems thrilled to be an owl, and the gameplay should put that across. Instead, you get a brief moment of excitement as the scene comes in, only to find that your options are to either sluggishly turn left and right, or to commit to fully swooping onto the ground. It feels awkward when it should feel freeing. It's like going to a nudist beach, if you're me. And even if you do everything just fine, it doesn't change how uncomfortable it feels. It's like going to a nudist beach, if you're me. You're just supposed to reach down, grab some hairs and shove them in your mouth, but it feels so wrong. It's like going to a nudist beach, if you're a mother cat grooming her newborn kittens. When a section is bad, it does at least come with the promise that it'll be over soon, but when the game is mostly made up of little sections, it's not enough to know that each will be over quickly if the next might also be bad. You know, if there was a river made up of 50% Mars bars and 50% shit, there's a pretty good chance if you reach in your hand, you'll pluck out a Mars bar. The problem is, if it was near to too much shit, it's still not going to taste all that great. Thankfully, while there are some stinkers in there, most of the gameplay feels good enough for what it is. These segments may be shallow, but they're fun while they last. For instance, when you're playing as the monster, you move by outstretching a single tentacle and then dragging yourself forwards with a click, and then repeating. It's clunky, but you feel heavy and powerful like a monster, and it allows them to retain a sense of creepy mystery by only showing one limb. The good sections outweigh the bad, but some of the bad sections are awkward enough to really take you out of the experience. Even outside of the controls, you'll probably have noticed the restrictiveness of the game before you get to the owl. When playing as a regular roaming human, as is the case for some of the vignettes and nearly all of Edith's screen time, the game controls fine, but it doesn't trust you as a player, and so all too often takes that control away. I want less Ludovico technique and more whatever the opposite of that is. A free-moving neck, I suppose. I want more free-moving neck. Here's an example. The narration is talking about the old building poking out of the water at low tide. Now, there are some contextual clues there, which I like to think I would be able to pick up on and look to the sea. But it points the camera for you, and it takes even the mildest discovery out of it. Straight after, you have to look at it through a telescope anyway, so it's even more pointless to force my hand. It's like cutting onions in a room full of Crufts finalists watching Marley and Me. It doesn't constantly take neck control, and it's by no means enough to ruin the experience. It's just annoying when it would be so easy to fix. The different characters' stories are incredibly varied in length, gameplay, and tone, And the great thing about having so many different and diverse stories is that there are more chances for one to stick with you. Even if as a whole it's not an affecting experience, I'm sure that different parts of this game will resonate with different people. For some, it will be the cannery. The monotony of a menial job leads Lewis to recede further and further into his own imagination, leaving behind reality but finding glory in his own world. His eventual fate is heartbreaking, but maybe he's truly free. For others, the simplicity of the swing scene will hit them. Calvin is told that swinging over the top is impossible, and his attempt to do so gets him flung into the ocean. But he does make it over. He does it. For me, it's Shark rolling down a hill. Look at that big fish go. Of course, it's not just individual stories, they are tied together by Edith's story. It all feels like it's building up to something, but to me, it didn't really pay off. Edith's sections end up being the Desmond sections, an annoying formality before you can get back to the good stuff. The good stuff is there though, and it's worth playing through the mediocre to experience it. At its core, what remains of Edith Finch is a game that gets you to consider death in a variety of ways. When you talk about the game being centered around death, you might assume that it's solely out to depress you, but that's not the case here. In something like Silent Hill, things go from bad to worse. It will kick you in the teeth, and then the gap created from the kick will cause you to whistle when you breathe. And then that whistling will attract a flock of falcons who have escaped from a careless falconer's falcon van. Things just get worse and more depressing. That's not what Edith Finch is. There's sadness, but it's fleeting. There's also joy and humour and fear and comfort and doubt. There's a whole range of emotions, and they don't feel forced, they feel earned. You can get distracted from the fact that it all just ends in death, and maybe that's what life is. Death is a certainty, but everything surrounding it is so uncertain. It's terrifying, and there's no avoiding it. The best we can ever hope for is to learn to accept it as part of life, as hard as that may seem. What Remains of Edith Finch probably won't get you to do that if you haven't already, but it might get you to think about death in a different way. And when the time comes, I think I finally know how I'd like to go.